You have always taken your faith seriously. It's not performance. It's a place where you find meaning when everything else is chaos. So when your abuser quotes scripture to tell you that your concerns are selfish, you don't dismiss it straight away. You take it to prayer. You examine yourself. And you wonder whether or not your abuser is right. And that's the trap. Because you cannot question her interpretation without questioning your relationship with God. You cannot set a boundary without committing what she frames as sin. You cannot leave without abandoning everything you believe about commitment, covenant, and the vows you made before the divine. Your faith was supposed to be your foundation. Your abuser turned it into your cage. In today's episode of the Blueprint of Family Violence Against Men, we're going to talk about spiritual abuse within intimate relationships. What it looks like, how it operates, and why it is so difficult to name when you are inside it. We will look at the specific ways faith and moral frameworks get weaponized, what makes this form of abuse uniquely isolating, and what you can do to protect yourself while you are still in it. For those of you who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it is so often dismissed or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, subscribe, and add the words Stand Again into the chat. Those two words might just help a victim of family violence find theirs. One note before we begin. This is the only tactic in the entire blueprint of family violence against men that I have not experienced personally. I'm including it here to ensure that the set is complete, because the men who have lived this deserve to see it named. Let's begin. Spiritual abuse is the weaponization of religious beliefs, spiritual practices, or moral frameworks to control, manipulate, and harm a victim. The abuser recruits your own faith against you. Doctrine becomes justification. Scripture becomes a weapon. Community becomes their enforcer. And your relationship with the divine actually becomes a vulnerability that your abuser exploits. What makes spiritual abuse distinct from other tactics is the authority it borrows. When your abuser frames her demands in spiritual terms, she's not speaking as your wife. She's speaking as the voice of God. Resisting her becomes resisting the divine. Your boundaries become evidence of weak faith. Your complaints become spiritual failure. She positions herself as the mediator between you and the sacred, controlling access to meaning itself. The mechanism works because religious authority and coercive control share structural similarities. Both involve submission to a higher power. Both involve acceptance of revealed truth. Both carry consequences for disobedience. Your abuser exploits those parallels. Her preferences become divine mandates. Her interpretations become the only truth of the divine. Her demands carry the weight of eternal consequence. Spiritual abuse often activates religious teachings around headship, responsibility, and sacrifice. Many faith traditions position men as spiritually accountable for their families. Your abuser uses this selectively. You get the responsibility without the authority, the obligation to sacrifice without the right to voice concern, the duty to lead while she determines the destination. Your faith tells you to serve, to forgive, and to endure. Your abuser makes sure you do, on her terms. The reason spiritual abuse is so hard to recognize is that it hides inside genuine devotion. You're not being manipulated by someone who mocks your belief. You're being manipulated by someone who appears to share them. The tactics look like faith on the surface. They sound like scripture. They feel like conviction. And because your faith matters to you, you take her claims seriously. You examine yourself before you examine her behavior. You search for the sin in your own heart while she operates unchallenged. This creates a closed loop. If you resist, that's reclassified as pride. If you complain, that's reclassified as ingratitude. If you question her interpretation, that's reclassified as spiritual immaturity. Every exit is blocked by a verse, a principle, or a doctrine that she has positioned to condemn those exits. You are not fighting her. You're fighting God, or so it feels at the time. The damage here goes well beyond the relationship. Religion and spirituality serve as sources of meaning, community, and hope. They're resilience resources. The places that people turn to when circumstances become unbearable. When your abuser weaponizes your faith, she doesn't just control your behavior. She corrupts the very source that might have sustained you through anything else. You lose your relationship with her, your relationship with your community, and your relationship with the transcendent. Your abuser cuts you off from the one place you could have gone to for refuge. There are 5 distinct ways spiritual abuse operates in intimate relationships. Each targets a different dimension of faith and belonging. Type 1 is moral high grounding. Moral high grounding is when your abuser positions herself as spiritually superior to you. She's more faithful, more obedient, more aligned with divine will. Your position is framed as morally deficient. Her preferences become spiritual mandates. Your resistance becomes evidence of spiritual failure. This works because you take your faith seriously. If you believe in the religion framework she invokes, you have to take her claims about your spiritual condition seriously too. When she says your concerns reveal a selfish heart, you don't immediately dismiss it. You consider it. When she suggests your struggles indicate spiritual weakness, you examine yourself. Your own sincerity becomes the entry point for manipulation. You might mention that her comment at dinner hurt you, something dismissive that she said about your job in front of the kids. You're not attacking her, you're just telling her it landed badly. And your abuser looks at you with something like patience. If you were closer to God like I am, you would not be so easily offended. Your concern has now been reclassified. You brought up something that hurt, and your abuser turned it into evidence of your spiritual deficit. She's above this kind of pettiness, you are not. The issue you raised disappears. What remains is her position above you, looking down. The trap is that questioning her spiritual standing feels like arrogance. Who are you to claim she's wrong about being closer to God? The very humility your faith cultivates becomes the mechanism of your silence. Type 2 is doctrine weaponization. Doctrine weaponization is the selective use of religious teaching, scriptures, or spiritual concepts to justify your abuser's control, to demand compliance from you, or to punish any resistance to them. Your abuser extracts texts from context, interpreting them to serve her purposes, and then deploys them as divine commands that you must obey. The mechanism here exploits the authoritative status of religious text. Scripture is revealed truth. When your abuser quotes it to demand submission, she invokes an authority higher than either of you. Your resistance is not disagreement with her, it is disobedience to God. She selects the interpretations that serve her control, ignoring passages that might offer balance or alternative readings. Religious traditions contain multitudes. Your abuser presents her selection as the only truth. For example, You could have asked her 3 times to stop belittling you in front of her family. Tonight she did it again. When you bring it up in the car, she quotes Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her. She lets that land. That's what sacrificial love looks like. It endures. It doesn't complain. You know the verse. You believe the verse. But something feels wrong about how she's using it. You're trying to say that sacrificial love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. She shakes her head. Love bears all things. That's scripture. If you can't bear a small thing like this, what does that say about your love? The verse you believe has been turned into a cage. You can't argue with her without arguing with Paul, and she knows it. Many religious traditions teach that a husband should love his wife sacrificially, as Christ loved the church. Your abuser has now activated this teaching to demand endless tolerance of her behavior. Your sacrificial love becomes her entitlement to mistreat you, and any limit you place on what you'll accept becomes evidence that your love isn't truly Christ-like. The bind is now complete. You cannot protect yourself without failing the spiritual standard that she has imposed. Type 3 is community leverage. Community leverage is the use of shared religious community as an extension of her control. The community becomes audience, enforcer, and isolation mechanism. It is a space where her narrative is performed, where pressure of your compliance is applied, and from which you are excluded if you fail to submit to your abuser. Religious communities are built on trust. Members assume good faith in one another. This creates vulnerability in the hands of an abusive person. Most religious communities lack training to identify coercive control, particularly when perpetrated by women. Leaders may encourage couples counseling, forgiveness, and reconciliation without recognizing that those interventions can be dangerous in abuse contexts. Her access to community leadership allows her to frame the situation before you speak. By the time you try to offer your perspective, opinions have already been confirmed. For example, you might get a call from one of the elders. He wants to meet for coffee. When you sit down, he's gentle but serious. He says your wife came to him, concerned about your anger, your emotional distance, your spiritual state, that your wife is worried about the family. He's not accusing you of anything, he just wants to help. You try to explain what's actually happening at home, the constant criticism, the control, the way she twists everything. He listens, but you can see it on his face. He's already decided you're the problem. She got there first, she framed the story, and now you're not a man seeking help, you're a man making excuses. Religious communities often expect men to lead their families in faith. When your abuser positions herself as a concerned wife struggling with a spiritually deficient husband, the community's response is often shaped by that expectation. You're not seen as a victim, you're seen as a man failing in his spiritual responsibilities. The very community that should support you has now become another site of your abuser's control. The fourth type is spiritual shame induction. Spiritual shame induction attacks your moral identity, your sense of yourself as good, faithful, or even worthy. It uses religious frameworks to give shame eternal weight. Unlike general shame tactics, spiritual shame carries implications beyond this life. Your failures are not merely personal deficiencies. They're offenses against the divine order. The mechanism exploits the totality of religious worldview. If you believe in divine judgment, eternal consequences, and spiritual accountability, attacks on your spiritual standing strike at the deepest levels of identity. Your abuser frames your needs or boundaries as selfishness before God. She suggests your struggles indicate spiritual weakness. Your resistance is not just failure as a husband, it's failure in a man of faith. For example, you've been working late for weeks trying to keep the family afloat financially. You're exhausted. One evening, you sit down after dinner instead of helping with the kids' bedtime routine, and she looks at you. A man closer to God would do more for his family. That's it. No scripture, no argument, just a statement about who you are. You try to explain what you've been carrying. She says, I'm not talking about your job, I'm talking about your heart. You do the bedtime routine, but the words stay. You start wondering if your exhaustion is selfishness, if the limits you feel are spiritual weakness. If God sees you the way she just described, a man who isn't close enough to him to show up properly, she didn't criticize what you did. She told you what your limits reveal about your soul. The damage from spiritual shame is profound because it attacks the foundation of identity. For a person of faith, moral standing before God is a bedrock of self-worth. When your abuser convinces you that you're spiritually defective, she doesn't just make you feel bad. She makes you believe you are bad, at the deepest level in the eyes of the highest authority. Recovery requires rebuilding a relationship with the divine independent of her, and that process can take years. Type 5 is belief system isolation. Belief system isolation is about the outcome, not the method. The other types describe how she operates. This one describes what she's targeting: your access to spiritual support. She wants to cut you off from the people, the communities, the practices that might sustain you, offer perspective, or help you see what is happening. Your abuser may use any of the tactics from the other types to achieve it. She might claim superior understanding of your family's faith. She might weaponize doctrine to create conflict. She might leverage community dynamics to position you as a problem. The method varies. The goal here is the same: you spiritually alone. Religious communities can be both source of support and an instrument of isolation. If your abuser successfully frames you as spiritually compromised, your people in your community will distance themselves from you. If your faith community is also her social network, your exclusion leaves you without the relationships that might help you see clearly. Your abuser severs your connection to transcendence, to community, and to the meaning-making structures that would help you understand what is being done to you. Protecting yourself from spiritual abuse while still inside the relationship requires separating your faith from your abuser's interpretation of it. This is difficult because she's positioned herself as the authority on what your faith requires. But your relationship with the divine does not require her mediation. The first tool here is private devotional practice. Establish space for your own relationship with God that she cannot access or control. This might be early morning before she wakes, time during your commute, or a practice she does not know about. The point is to have connection to your faith that is not filtered through your abuser's interpretation. Read scripture without her commentary. Pray without her framing. Let yourself experience the divine directly outside of her influence. This is not deception, it's spiritual survival. Your faith belongs to you and you alone. The second tool is external theological perspective. Find a source of religious teaching outside her control. A podcast, a book, a mentor she does not know about. The goal is to hear other voices interpret the faith that you share. Her reading of scripture is not the only reading. Her application of doctrine is not the only application. When you hear different perspectives, her claims lose their absolute authority. You begin to see that sincere people of faith can understand these texts differently. Her interpretation is one view among many, not revealed truth that you are forced to accept. The third tool is documentation through the lens of your own value. When your abuser weaponizes faith against you, write down what happened, how it conflicts with your own understanding of your religion. Not her understanding, yours. What does your faith actually teach about how spouses should treat each other? About compassion, about kindness, about humility, about bearing with one another. Record the gap between what she claims your faith requires of you and what you believe it actually teaches. This documentation serves two purposes. It helps you see the manipulation clearly, and it anchors you to your own spiritual convictions rather than hers. Spiritual abuse is devastating because it attacks the source of meaning itself. Your abuser does not just control your behavior, she corrupts your access to the divine, the place where you go when everything else fails. But here's what she cannot do. Your abuser cannot actually speak for God. She can claim to, she can position herself as a mediator, she can use religious language and community pressure and doctrinal manipulation, but she is not the divine. And your relationship with the sacred does not require her approval. The faith that she weaponizes still belongs to you. The beliefs that drew you to the transcendent are still your beliefs. The meaning you found in prayer, in scripture, in community, that meaning exists independent of her interpretation. Your abuser borrowed the authority of the divine to control you, but she only borrowed it. It was never hers to give or withhold. Recovery from spiritual abuse often means rebuilding your faith from the ground up, separating what you actually believe from what she told you to believe. That process is painful. It's also sacred, because what emerges is a faith that's truly yours. Tested, yes. Wounded, maybe. But authentic in a way it could not be while she stood between you and God. Your faith was meant to be your foundation. It still is, and it can be fully again. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one-on-one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.